I used to think that having a room full of synthesizers would make me more creative. It mostly made me better at researching gear. I'm in the middle of packing for a move, and it got me thinking about this room and the 5 years that I've spent here making music. When I moved in here, it was like a beautiful blank canvas, my own dedicated space for making music. And boy, I really relished the opportunity to fill it with as much stuff as I could possibly cram in here. This was in the midst of the pandemic, and I just went hog wild. 16U of modular, 3 Electron boxes, sub 37, Peak, niche stuff like a Norns, a Mother 32, a Siren, outboard effects, a giant mixer. I was cycling through so much gear in here that I was basically running an e-commerce side hustle on reverb.com. I was knee deep in the chase for the perfect hardware setup, but at some point I realized that chasing the perfect setup is a losing game because it always turns into one more item, one more tweak, one more reason that you can't be productive with what you already have. Here's the problem with getting lost in the hardware cycle. Now, gear research can be intoxicating. You watch a video of someone doing something amazing with a synth or effect pedal or any cool device, and you think, that could be me. You pore over spec sheets, read Reddit threads, watch tutorial videos, all to figure out whether this new piece of gear is for you. Now, obviously, we want to do our research when we're considering spending a lot of money on something. But I think a lot of people with this hobby can waste a lot of time fantasizing about products that won't do anything to actually make them a better musician. You're just flooding your brain with really cheap dopamine, thinking about how sick it's going to be when you get this thing.
You can make the dopest shit. This is the final piece of the puzzle.
When the reality is often quite more complicated than that, and not to mention more boring. But anyway, let's say you've done your research and now you've made your purchase. Congratulations, now you have to learn how to use this thing you bought. That's even more time away from making music. Learning hardware, especially when it comes to the complex sequencers often used to power these setups, is no joke. It takes serious long-term effort and commitment to master the idiosyncrasies of these devices. They kind of demand your constant and unyielding attention to get the most out of them. And if you're not already well versed in the aspects of producing music, well, now you've added a whole other thing that you need to get good at before you can even get to the music part. And if you've been subconsciously training your brain to feel good when fantasizing about the possibilities of what a new piece of gear can unlock, well, doesn't the reality of sitting down with a really complex sequencer or, God forbid, like multiple new things at once seem kind of unsatisfying in comparison? Maybe let's just go back to YouTube for a moment and, oh, look at this. This looks really cool. Oh, doesn't that sound amazing? Oh, I'd love to have that. Look at this. It would be so sick if I had this, and I bet I would make the dopest shit. Congratulations, now you have to learn how to use this thing you bought. When I was deep in the throes of studio optimization, I was cycling gear in and out so frequently that I never gave myself the opportunity to really learn any one piece deeply. I had my mainstays for sure, and those would stick around for a long time, but that was just a small subset of the stuff I was bringing in and out of the studio. If something wasn't immediately satisfying, more often than not, I would just get rid of it and get something else in, starting this cycle all over again. And I think my modular setup was kind of the final boss of this issue, and while I definitely did learn a ton about synthesis and sound design from going through this, it was ultimately like a way too involved and expensive endeavor than it needed to be. And ultimately, all this churn and research does is get in the way of creativity, productivity, and mastery. If you tell yourself you want to produce music, don't let product research become your hobby. What should make you feel good is making music, not thinking about something, a piece of plastic, that might theoretically help you make music. All right, you've got a bunch of stuff, you learned how to use it, now it's time to make music. And I did for sure. There's evidence of that all over this channel, my socials. But instead of working towards making music that I was proud of and that could stand on its own merits, it mostly became more about like, oh, look what this synth can do, or look what I did with this thing. I don't think it was really a conscious decision, but I do now feel that like mentally and emotionally it was probably easier to settle into this like lowered standard of being a gear jammer where I wasn't working on my production skills. I wasn't finishing anything, but I was getting a little attention at least on otherwise unremarkable music. I could use like the vibes and novelty of a tightly framed shot in my studio with like the blinking lights and, as a way to make something pedestrian feel more interesting. I was optimizing nearly the entirety of my musical setup and output for other synth dorks instead of working on music that could just stand on its own with no qualifications. When you get a bunch of stuff, you need to, find the space for it somewhere, and you also need to spend a lot of time getting everything connected and working properly together. Between creating routing diagrams, working with patch bays, setting up mixers, getting the MIDI working correctly, it took a lot of effort. And as I was packing up the old room, I've moved now and I'm still in the process of setting everything up. I think of that big metal A-frame stand I had as kind of emblematic of a lot of my problems. It was big, ugly, wires running down everywhere. I had moved it around to various walls in the time I was sitting there, and it just never really worked out for me. Everything always felt a little out of reach, even though by the end it was right next to my desk. I spent so much time just simply rearranging things on and around this stand, moving the arms around, that I could have just spent making music. And I think it just goes to show that like ergonomics are really important. And if you're just focused on filling your space with as much stuff as possible, you might start to lose sight of that. I was kind of blind to how cluttered, messy, and uninviting my space had become. And guess what? None of that stuff is conducive to creativity. And while I do think I was able to start solving some of these issues towards the end of my time in that room, they definitely did kind of persist at least a little bit all the way to the end. So now that I'm in a new space, there are a few guiding principles that I'm going to try to be following as closely as possible. Above all, I want the space to be warm, inviting, free of excess clutter, and a place that inspires creativity. I want the space to be primarily focused on making music on a computer. I want to have a few select pieces of gear always ready. So right now I have the Push right next to my keyboard, which has been cool, and then the Sub 37 right over to the side. And then finally, I don't know how this is going to shake out exactly yet, but I do want a space on my desk where I can swap in and out like small pieces of gear just for experimentation and inspiration. So if I had any advice to give to someone in a similar situation, first of all, if you just want to get a bunch of stuff to fool around and experiment and have fun, go for it. You can stop watching here. I hope you have so much fun, and this video isn't really for you. But thanks for watching up until this point. All right, for the rest of you, don't let those cheap little hits of satisfaction that you get from research and watching YouTube videos and spending money get in the way of doing the work to actually improve your skills. Don't let researching music tech become your hobby, because I'm telling you, it will never be enough. It is a void that cannot be filled. And I guess this is like a little more deep than I was planning for this video to be, but the only path to happiness and fulfillment is to do things that are boring and hard. There aren't shortcuts. If you do decide to buy something, which isn't a crime, maybe just do a little check-in with yourself and ask, what am I looking to get out of this exactly? How does it fit into my workflow? Could I do it with something I already have? And if so, why do I want this? Am I feeling a little dissatisfied and vulnerable right now, and this might make me feel good for a short period of time? Maybe. Maybe not. I think it's important to try to cultivate a space that's conducive to creativity, whatever that means for you. This one I think is important. Unless you are very experienced or have very specific needs, do not go from 0 to 100. Do not start from nothing and try to build out some crazy interconnected spaceship cockpit setup all at once. It's not going to work. You're not going to make anything good. You're going to be unhappy and have spent way too much money at the end of it. Just start small and make an effort to really learn and become familiar with every single piece of gear you bring into your studio. And finally, if you're just now considering getting primarily into music making on hardware, really try to examine why. And be honest with yourself. Is it you just want to turn knobs? Are you allergic to computer? Do you want your Instagram posts to get more likes? Do you just not care about like modern music production at all? Are you just saying that to protect yourself? At least go into it with clarity. And to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with people who want to make music primarily on hardware or like only on hardware, but just like from spending time around these spaces and talking to people and especially people who are like, they have all this stuff, but they're unhappy because they're still not making music that they enjoy. I think a lot of people are kind of unnecessarily making things difficult for themselves. So if you're looking to get into this, at least go into it with clarity. Okay, I'm going to keep working on getting my new space set up. I really hope I don't repeat the same mistakes I made at the last one. I don't think I'm gonna, but maybe a little bit because I'm only human.